Welcome to UFHL Now, a close-up look at the ultimate fantasy hockey league. The most realistic fantasy gameplay. High stakes, high reward. Here's your host, the owner of Duckman's Domination in the UFHL, and the Mighty Mallards of the UFAHL, Dean Millard.
Hello there, and welcome to UFHL Now, here on the Ultimate Fantasy Sports Network. My name is Dean Millard, proud owner of Duckman's Domination, the Mighty Mallards, and a great affiliation with High Level Scouting, owned by my wife, and Craig Button is the president of our scouting. George Batchel is the GM of the Mighty Mallards, and we are happy to be here. We are in last place, and we have been there for most of the year. Our domination just starts a little bit later than when usually people start their domination. But don't worry, we will get there. As mentioned, we are on the UFSN. You can get a hold of us on Twitter at UFS Network. You can email UFSN at UFSN@UFFsports.com. And you can follow Duckman's Domination on Twitter at Ducks Domination. This is what we're going to be looking at on today's program. Brad Marchand, just an absolute beast when it comes to fantasy. Just a great week and just another great season, and should go way higher in fantasy drafts, in my opinion. People that get so stuck on points, while they are really important, there's a lot of other categories to fill out. Jack Campbell, he's spun a great week for the Tornadoes, 3-0. We're actually going to take a look at the top 5 save leaders when it comes to the ultimate fantasy hockey league. So we'll take a look at who are the best goaltenders when it comes to save, and you get 0.2 points per save. We, of course, will look at the top 10 standings, and everybody's favorite, Larry Fisher, as the UFHL Insider. There's a lot cooking as we lead up to Monday's trade deadline. So let's get on with it now and dive into the UFHL Now.
You're watching the Ultimate Fantasy Sports Network, UFSN, your one-stop fantasy shop. Get in touch on Twitter at UFS Network. Email us, UFSN@UFFsports.com.
All right, so I always like to highlight some players that did some impressive things during the week that was, and our week on this show dates back to last Friday. So we will start that off right now as we take a look at the top performers in the UFHL. And I mentioned Brad Marchand earlier. I think he is really one of the perfect fantasy players. In 4 games this week, he averaged 10.38 fantasy points per game. Plus, he's making barely over $6 million. I mean, that is incredible. He had 41.5 points this week. In 4 games, he had 5 goals, 5 assists. He was +8, 6 penalty minutes, which is kind of low for Brad Marchand, actually. He had 13 shots on goal, 2 game winners, bonus points, 2 power play points, 2 shorthanded points, 6 hits, 6 takeaways. The only thing that stopped him from winning both showcases this week is he gave the puck away twice. If you can get every category and nothing in the giveaways, you win both packages for the showcase here on UFHL Price is Right. So Brad Marchand, just absolutely awesome this past week. So was Nathan MacKinnon. Nathan MacKinnon had another strong week when it comes to fantasy points. 5 goals, 17 shots on goal. 4 power play points as well for Nathan MacKinnon. How about Jacob Chychrun? 8.28 points per game. He had the Hattie. He had 3 games, 3 goals. He also had 4 assists. and he had a game-winning goal. The game he had the hat trick, he scored all 3 goals for Arizona, including the overtime winner. It was pretty awesome. 13 shots on goal for Jacob Chychrun, and he threw in a few hits as well. So pretty impressive stuff in that regard for Arizona defenseman who got really popular in fantasy early in the season and cooled off a little bit like the Coyotes, but still producing this week for sure is Jacob Chychrun. And impressive young player that's making $4.6 million, so fits in nicely on a blue line somewhere. Elsewhere, we are looking at Jack Campbell, 3-0 for the Tornadoes, 89 saves, just 6 goals against, and he was the top goaltender this week. UC Saros actually had a shutout. He had a little bit more fantasy points, but wanted to give Campbell a bit of a shout out for the Tornadoes. And then how about Mackenzie Weegar? This is a pretty impressive week for Mackenzie Weegar. 15 hits. He was also +7 and racked up 5 points. Also he had 8 shots on goal. Did have 6 giveaways, so that's going to hurt in the giveaway department as minuses. And Vincent Trocheck. Things have been tough in Florida this year with losing some pretty important players. Vincent Trocheck has been pretty consistent. He's making just under $5 million, 4.75, and he put up 5.9 fantasy points per game in this past week stretch. 2 goals, 4 assists, 18 hits, and 11 shots on goal. So getting into the double digits on a couple of categories. He also had 8 giveaways, so that's a bit of a negative, but still pretty impressive performance in Florida. And certainly the Outlaws are absolutely loving that. And we'll get to the top 10 standings in just a little bit. But we take a look now at the top 5 save leaders in the UFHL. And this is kind of interesting because when you look at the top 5 goaltenders in the UFHL, this list is pretty similar. It's just there's 1 or 2 guys missing that are in the top 5, and it's in a different order. So Connor Hellebuck has the most saves in the UFHL, and overall he has the 3rd most fantasy points. So the reigning Vezina MVP still in the top 3, but he has faced the most or has the most saves rather in the UFHL. Now, Kevin Lankinen is a bit of a surprise here on this list because, a lot of people probably weren't betting on that, but Strong Island has certainly been the recipient, especially for a guy making $800,000 a year. But 131.8 fantasy points puts him number 4 overall, but he's number 2 overall when it comes to the most saves at 884. Hellebuck has a pretty good lead, and then it's a race. It's like Red Army in our league, although the couple of teams that are still fighting to try to catch him. Number 3 is Andrei Vasilevsky for the most saves at 837. He is the top goaltender in the UFHL when it comes to fantasy points, 168.9. And that's a decent lead on the number 2 guy, who's actually not on this list. Philip Grubauer is the number 2 goalie in fantasy for the Brutes at 150.1 fantasy points, but he's just on the outside of the top 5 when it comes to saves. Thatcher Demko, 767 saves when it for the Generals, and he's 10th when it comes to fantasy points. He's actually tied with UC Saros, who just had a shutout this past week, and they're both making around the same. Demko around just over $1 million, although that's obviously going to go up. And then Jordan Binnington rounds out, and he just had a 50-save performance, so that really pushed him up this list a little bit, and probably the reason why he's ahead of Philip Grubauer on this list, because you do have to go down to number 14 for the Rock Republic goaltender in the overall. He's at 97.1 fantasy points, but has faced the 5th most shots. So obviously the amount of saves, or rather, he has made the fifth most saves, rather, not faced the fifth most shots. But making saves is obviously a correlation to being a strong goaltender. But you don't have to be, it's not a guarantee that, Jordan Binnington is going to be in the rest. You have to have a good team around you so you can get the wins, the shutouts, keep the goals against average down, and things like that. So an interesting look at the top 5 saves leader at 0.2 points per save in the UFHL. All right, now let's take a look at the top 10 standings, and there is zero change from last week. This is the first time that this has happened since we started keeping track of the standings in the UFHL. But no standings. Red Army remains on top. And we'll bring in the Fantrax site in a second so you can kind of see the difference between the top 10. But you do have Red Army on top, Titans at 2, Ice Vikings, just like last week, at number 3. The Royals and the Outlaws round out the top 5. Then you have the Rock Republic, Stingrays, Yetis, Grizzlies, and Brutes. So it's an interesting battle for that top 10 positions. And when you look at Red Army, the lead is, 46.25. So that's shrunk a little bit from the past few episodes. The Titans have an opportunity to catch. The Ice Vikings have an outside shot at catching. As I've said before, I still don't think Luc Grenier, a.k.a. George Steinbrenner's Red Army team, is going to be caught, unless he just decides to really go rogue and trade everybody. He's on again, off again with the trades. But anyway, the interesting races after that, you look at the Outlaws and the gap between the Royals, but the gap between the Royals and the Rock Republic, and then some of these other teams as you go all the way down the list if you want to. You can find that, of course, on Fantrax. So no movement in the top 10. I expect there to be movement. Somebody's going to move up and somebody's going to fall down. But I am personally going to make a prediction that Montreal Red Army will not be caught. All right. Everybody's favorite segment is coming up next on UFHL Now. It's Larry Fisher as our UFHL Insider.
Time to get the scoop on the UFHL with our insider, Larry Fisher. He's had lines in the water all week long. What will he reel in for us today? Let's dive in and find out what's going on with the UFHL now.
As I welcome in the UFHL Insider for another packed segment, and Larry, we're talking today on Friday. We're going to chat again on Monday during a live UFHL trade deadline special. And man, I'm just wondering how much of the stuff we're going to be talking about today will we again be talking about Monday if indeed comes true. But a lot of things could happen, and let's start off first of all with something that has already happened, and that is a very, very quick partnership has ended between a franchise and some management types that they brought on.
Yeah, the partnership between Dynasty and Five Eyes Scouting Services was short-lived. We announced it last week's UFHL Now show, and it really looked like a potential win-win, and good guys on both sides with Xavier and Brian with Dynasty, and Trevor and Jeremy and Nolan with Five Eyes, and all passionate hockey guys, good hockey minds. It seemed like a nice fit. And unfortunately, the chain of command is a relatively new concept in fantasy. As you know, usually if you're a fantasy GM, you run your own team, and that's that. But, Xavier was the president of hockey operations, and he wanted final say on the hockey decisions. And I think the Five Eyes group, when they took over, they sort of, you hear it all the time in the NHL, oh, this GM has full autonomy. They don't have to go to Bob Nicholson or Daryl Cates. They can just, Ken Holland can do whatever he wants. And I think that's what Jeremy and the Five Eyes group thought. They were taking over the actual management of the franchise, but Xavier was still above them, and he wanted to have final say because Xavier's done a really good job rebuilding the Dynasty franchise. And so it was the fact that Xavier said he was surprised by the one and only trade that the Five Eyes group did, which was sending out Philip Deneau in exchange for two real quality prospects in Jack Dugan and Joel Hofer. That was a quality trade for the future of Dynasty. But again, Xavier was surprised by that. He didn't know that was coming. And so I think they went back to the table and further discussed the chain of command. And I think the Five Eyes guys really wanted the full autonomy, the ability to make trades. When they see a trade they like, they can make it without, having to ask permission. And Xavier, and I think there was when they got back to the table to further discuss that, there were some philosophical differences there as far as the Five Eyes guys. Jeremy, when he came out in the trade talk group, he really wanted to potentially use cash considerations and reel in the big fish ahead of the trade deadline by using cash. And I think just that direction, the approach that Five Eyes were going to take with the Dynasty franchise didn't really fit with Xavier's vision as president of Hockey Ops. So unfortunately, it was a matter of 48 hours and one trade later, and the Five Eyes group was no longer affiliated with Dynasty and no longer overseeing the management of the Dynasty franchise. So Xavier and Brian are back in control of Dynasty and have made a blockbuster trade since. So, but I do think Five Eyes Scouting Services, like I said, they're all three passionate guys. I think they'll be back in the UFHL before long, whether they decide to purchase their own franchise or they find a better fit where they get that full autonomy that somebody who owns it as an investment wants guys to run it and do as they see fit. And I think that fit will come for Five Eyes. And in the meantime, Xavier will continue to do good work with Dynasty.
Wow, that was quite interesting. I remember I reached out to you right away, as obviously thinking of the UFHL Insider segment, saying I can't wait to find out the details on this, and hopefully the Five Eyes find a franchise or a team to be able to work with. Now, something that was kind of teased a little bit on the UFFS podcast most recently, you want to talk about.
Yeah, Curtis Johnson was one of our guests on last week's UFFS podcast, and he sort of said, I have a scouting partnership in the works here, and I was hoping to announce it on this show, but I wasn't able to. And I think the details of that partnership sort of leaked out indirectly through the open market ads for the CanWest Scouting Agency this week. The fact that they're looking to expand into Europe and possibly bring on a European affiliate scout or forge a partnership with another European scout. Just simply based on seeing CanWest Scouting Agency add two really under-the-radar Russian kids, as well as 2022 eligible Czech forward from the Czech Republic. So those guys wouldn't have necessarily been on the radar for Harrison Fallow and Curtis Johnson and the guys that are sort of overseeing the Western Canada portion of CanWest Scouting Agency. So I do think sooner than later we're going to hear a partnership announcement, and it will take CanWest Scouting Agency and make it a global agency by involving a member of their scouting department in Europe.
Okay, everybody in every fantasy league has been dealing with COVID-19. Well, we're all dealing with COVID-19. Let's be real in this global pandemic. But as it pertains to sports, you're seeing guys, teams, games getting canceled, players on COVID lists. So you're wondering if you're in a weekly league, it's absolutely hell, and it really sucks. But there are real world consequences when it comes to lineup decisions in our league. And we saw that on LTR. And there's not many fantasy leagues that actually have real world consequences, but ours does. And something came about with COVID through that.
Yeah, Kamikaze Donnie Talk has kind of been, I wouldn't say bending the rules, but he's been maximizing the ability to take advantage of COVID protocol. And he put Jake Virtanen on the COVID protocol because Vancouver's game on Wednesday of this week wasn't officially canceled as of Tuesday. It was still scheduled, so he was eligible to go on the COVID protocol as if that game was happening. But with 21 players sidelined by COVID, it was pretty obvious that game was going to be canceled and a new schedule be announced. So he got one extra day of a free player there in his lineup with Jake Virtanen down. I think he brought up Vitaly Kravtsov, the Rangers rookie, but he also had Adam Gaudette on the IR. And when you looked into Adam Gaudette, he was actually another player, the first player for the Canucks who went on the COVID protocol. And on Cap Friendly, he was on the non-roster status, not on the IR. So there was just a clarification made there to Donnie and to the rest of the league that COVID players, if the entire team is sidelined, the team's not playing games, you can't have those players on your IR. You can only have them on the COVID list, the IR, if the team's playing without them, like we've seen earlier in the year with Washington without Alex Ovechkin or guys like that. So I think that clarification needed to be made, and I think that was because Fantrax earlier in the year wasn't putting anybody that had COVID or in the COVID protocol. They didn't have the IR flag on Fantrax, and now some of them do. So there's the confusion where they're allowed to put them on IR on the website on Fantrax because they're technically IR eligible on Fantrax, and Adam Gaudette being an example of that. But again, we've clarified that Adam Gaudette and no Vancouver Canucks are allowed to be on IR as long as the team is sidelined, unless they have a legitimate injury, like a guy like Elias Pettersson, who was obviously hurt prior to the COVID sidelining. But there is a lot of chaos and a lot of concern over the Vancouver Canucks situation. I mean, like I said, in weekly fantasy leagues, if you're loaded up, I know one fantasy league I'm in, they have, Brock Besser and JT Miller, and they're right in the running for first place, and they're missing two of their big guns. So the Vancouver Canucks situation is one that the UFHL is going to have to monitor closely, but certainly it needed to be clarified that Vancouver Canucks are off limits for IR as long as they're in the COVID protocol.
I'll say this. You're not in a real fantasy league if there's not a loophole guy or girl that tries to expose every loophole. Like you can consider yourself you've made it in fantasy sports if there's a loophole person in your league, because almost every one of my leagues there's always one. And you know what? Sometimes that's good because it exposes flaws and gaps in the system that you have to close before it goes. And in any kind of startup league, you're going to get those quite often in the first little while.
For sure. And I think, Donnie, obviously he's trying to catch Strong Island for a playoff spot potentially in the Orr division. But as you know, Dean, with the sliding scale payouts in the UFHL, 16th or 17th is better than 18th, right, for the payout. So every little extra man game you can get in and leverage, it results in more fantasy points. So he's trying to work within the rules because he didn't do anything wrong. Technically, Adam Gaudette was IR eligible and he used them. So he doesn't have to be fined or forfeit any points, but it needed to be clarified that now that Fantrax is allowing COVID players to be IR eligible, the UFHL is saying, no, those players still aren't IR eligible because the entire team's sidelined, not just the player. So hopefully the Vancouver Canucks will be able to make up those games before the end of the regular season, and they'll find a way to play again. But there is a lot of concern around Vancouver, and it's impacting some of the decisions in the UFHL.
Yeah, and hopefully those players and their families are able to ride through this and recover and get back to their normal lives in the NHL. Now, last week we showed off the cool name, logo. I love the Bentley Jacks, and they now have their first signed player in franchise history.
They do, and it was very exciting the way it came about because they actually announced it live on Harrison Miller's podcast, the Ruby ISS podcast as well. But he had Brendan Kopp, the general manager of the Bentley Jacks, on his show, and they hammered out a deal. They agreed to Ruby ISS scouting agency sold the Bentley Jacks signed Aiden Dudas, a Los Angeles Kings forward prospect from the Ruby ISS scouting agency. And Aiden Dudas is a guy that, he's not a big name prospect, mid-round pick, little bit undersized. But who he really reminds me of, Dean, is Connor Garland from the Arizona Coyotes, who's was a high-scoring junior. It had his little bit of struggles in the AHL, but has really found a role in Arizona and become an offensive catalyst at the NHL level. Sort of that Connor Garland, Brad Marchand, they're all kind of that same pesky, undersized but hardworking guys. And I think Aiden Dudas could grow into that type of a role in Los Angeles. So I really liked it as a first player for the Bentley Jacks franchise. And you could say that Aiden Dudas is to the Bentley Jacks what Reed Duke was to the Vegas Golden Knights. As you remember, the Vegas Golden Knights signed Reed Duke from the Brandon Wheat Kings well in advance of their expansion draft. And the same applies for the Bentley Jacks. So I know a lot of people reached out after and said, whoa, why are they signing a player and how does this work and how are they allowed to sign a player. So the way it works is the Bentley Jacks are allowed to sign any players who are expansion exempt and they're NHL property. So the way that works is they can sign from scouting agencies. They can sign players that are first and second year pros and players that are drafted or signed by, as long as their NHL rights are owned, then they're eligible for a UFHL protected list. And the Bentley Jacks have 27 spots on their protected list. 8 of them will be drafted through the expansion draft because they'll get 31 players. And they have a 23-man active roster, plus they'll have 8 on the protected list. So they have 19 spots that they can fill between now and July 21st if they want to target NHL property players and prospects that are owned by scouting agencies. And I know, talking with Brendan Kopp after that, they definitely plan to continue adding between now and July 21st. But they can't add any players from other franchises, and any trades they make will count as their selections and won't be announced until the July 21st expansion draft. But as far as acquiring players from scouts, that is open game as long as the player is expansion exempt. So they can't be a guy that would be eligible for the expansion draft. And as long as they are, NHL rights are owned as far as drafted or signed. So I think keep an eye on the Bentley Jacks. They're working behind the scenes, and I think Brendan Kopp is connecting with as many scouts as possible and seeing what kind of deals might be out there to get a strong protected list going and start filling some of those 19 spots ahead of the expansion draft.
You know, that Reed Duke signing by the Vegas Golden Knights really should have been our first clue of the Brandon Wheat Mafia taking over the Vegas Golden Knights at some point. And that was even before Kelly McCrimmon ended up there and brought all the Manitoban branded people with him to Vegas. It's basically Brandon West right now is the Wheat Mafia, we call it. But the other thing I want to mention is that Aiden Dudas, I just talked about Brad Marchand earlier in the show as, you know, being that perfect, like Brad Marchand is almost like a fantasy MVP. I don't know why he doesn't ever go higher in fantasy drafts. And I guess it depends on your setup. But you look at our setup, and who knows how it changes in the offseason. Guys like Brad Marchand, they are so valuable because they tick every box, and oftentimes a lot of those boxes have high numbers in it.
And West Coast Express targeted Brad Marchand. They acquired him in a trade prior to the season, and he has emerged as their franchise player. And like I said, I think those multi-cat guys with as many scoring categories as there are in the UFHL, and I know neither of us are a big fan of plus minus, but the Boston Bruins line, anytime you're on a line with Patrice Bergeron, your plus minus is going to be good. So, yeah. I mean, Brad Marchand literally checks every box in the UFHL scoring category, and he's a big-time MVP. And I mean, obviously, Aiden Dudas has a long way to go to get there. Brad Marchand wasn't a first-round pick either, and neither was Connor Garland. So they're those type of players that have to work their way up. But I think the skill set, the playing style is quite similar, Aiden Dudas, to a guy like Brad Marchand or Connor Garland. So I like that signing for the Bentley Jacks, and I hope we get to see him on the active roster in the years to come and really follow him up. I know Reed Duke got in a game with the Vegas Golden Knights. It's just cool to see those first player in franchise history actually become a part of the franchise, because they're not a big name guy through the expansion draft, but Aiden Dudas is part of the Bentley Jacks history as long as the franchise is in existence. So it'll be cool, and I'm rooting for Aiden Dudas to make his debut with the Bentley Jacks in the years to come.
Well, and the Jacks will have to sit and watch this year as the trade deadline runs its course. We feature pretty much everything about the NHL. So our deadline in the UFHL is the exact same, 3 p.m. Eastern on Monday. We will have a special trade deadline show Monday night. Exact time details still to come. But the Jacks will have to watch all the action that is going on, and there could be a lot of action based on the names, particularly on the blue line, that are on the trade board right now.
For sure. And we've seen 14 trades since last Friday's show. So over the last week, there's already been 14 trades. But I think defense, when you really look at the trade bait board, the names that pop out are the defensemen. And if you're in the market to trade, or you have a rental defenseman or somebody you want to trade, and I know Duckman's Domination's on that board with Justin Schultz, but it's a crowded board, and there's no fewer than 40 notable defensemen available, and a lot of people are shopping. I mean, there's the big name guys or expensive contract guys like Erik Karlsson and Ryan Suter and PK Subban. I don't expect those guys to move, but there's a lot of mid-level defensemen that I think, a guy like Justin Schultz, and not to call him mid-level, he's an upper-level defenseman, but there's a lot of those, mid-pairing and number 2, number 3 defensemen available We've talked about Nick Leddy in past shows. Alex Goligoski's already moved once. He's back on the trade block. And so I think we're going to see a fair amount of movement on defense. And we talked last week about the Gators having Jacob Slavin and Keith Yandel out there. And you can go up and down the list. I mean, even the Brutes, who are a team that has an eye on the expansion draft and knows they have too many defensemen to protect. So they've even put out guys like, Duncan Keith, Damon Severson, Vince Dunn, Will Butcher. So you can go up and down the list. There's a lot of franchises, 15, 20 franchises are dangling quality defensemen at the deadline. So I think we'll see a number of defensemen move, but I wonder if you're a seller and you're trying to move a defenseman, it's a buyer's market because there are a ton of defensemen available, and it's just probably going to come down to the wire on Monday. Who's willing to accept what, and who's willing to pony up for the defenseman they really want. If somebody wants Justin Schultz more than Nick Leddy, is it worth that extra asset or that extra cash considerations or whatever has to be done to get that deal done? So it's going to be very interesting to watch the defense and see how many of those 40 notable defensemen actually move between now and Monday's deadline, because a lot of them have been on the trade bait board for weeks already. And so it's going to be fun to watch the defense and what those returns are between now and Monday.
Well, and for Duckman's domination, we've imposed actually Sunday is our deadline because, we have an affiliation with High Level Scouting, meaning we lean on Craig Button for his knowledge when it comes to prospects. So if there's any deals that are involving prospects, we're going to want to get those done on Sunday because one of the guys we lean on is going to be a little bit busy on Monday, breaking stories and trades and things like that during the TSN coverage. So, I've told Craig, we're not going to bother you with a bunch of text messages because you have an actual trade deadline job to do. So we're going to get any of our deals with prospects done on Sunday. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't look at other deals and things like that, but, we really obviously value Craig's opinion. So that's something that we've kind of imposed ourselves. And we've let, a bunch of the teams know that, if you're looking for a player that's going to involve prospects, make sure you reach out to us by Sunday. Other trades we will look at on Monday, but the bulk of our work, I think, is going to be done by Sunday just because we know Craig's going to be a little bit tied up on Monday.
And I don't think you'll be alone in that, Dean, because as we know, most people work Monday to Friday, and that that 9 a.m. to noon, the deadline is noon East or 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific on Monday. And I think a lot of people are working Monday morning. So I'm expecting a pretty busy weekend starting tonight already on the trade front in the UFHL. But some will leave it to the 11th hour, and there'll be an offer sitting there that they just need to accept right at the buzzer. And we'll see some deals get processed and approved probably after the trade deadline. Technically, they'll be submitted before, but the news will break after the deadline. As we see in the NHL every year, it's sometimes crickets right until the deadline, and then there's a flurry of activity. So it could play out that way, but I definitely think it's going to be a busy weekend when people are off and at home and willing to do that wheeling and dealing and negotiating. I think it's Duckmans will be busy between now and Sunday, I'm sure, fielding calls, and I think the rest of the league will likely try to get most of their business done by Sunday evening as well.
Yeah, hopefully none of those fax machines get stuck like back in the old days and some of those trades wouldn't go through, but it's same process. So if a trade is submitted to the league before the deadline and both teams confirm it, it will be considered accepted. Is that as long as it's emailed in? Is that the case with us?
Yeah, any trades that are received and confirmed, like you said, prior to noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern on Monday will be approved and processed, and those players will be in lineups and on rosters for Monday night's games. But there could be a bit of a delay there, like we said, just with the processing time. So if trades come out after the deadline, you can rest assured they were submitted and confirmed prior to that deadline on Monday.
Looking forward to wrapping it all up with you guys on Monday night. All right, let's talk about the Tornadoes now and kind of the steps that they're taking forward. And I love that we, highlight different franchises that are doing some great things on every show. It's one of the things I really, really like. Yeah,
I think the Tornadoes are a franchise that are ready to start taking some steps forward and putting some pieces in place. And this was a trade that made sense for Rob Love and the Tornadoes to acquire two quality young players that were first-round NHL draft picks in Sam Steele of the Anaheim Ducks and Jesse Puljujarvi of the Edmonton Oilers. And I think he got both those players in exchange for a 2023 first-round pick. We know Tornadoes are at the bottom of the standings in 2021. Red Army moved those players out, Puljujarvi and Steele, in hopes of that 2023 draft pick still being in the bottom 5, because that's a chance to bid on Connor Bedard and Matvei Michkov if the Tornadoes don't trend up out of the bottom 5 over the next 2 seasons. So from the Tornadoes aspect, you get 2 guys that you can plug into your lineup and replace some of the filler that was there and really be immediate contributors and guys that they had room on their protected list, obviously, for both those guys, because they do need to be protected for the expansion draft. I believe Jesse Puljujarvi is no longer waiver exempt, and I think this is Sam Steele's final season of waiver exempt, so they need to be on the roster for next season. And I just think with the depth that Red Army's assembled, they won't really skip a beat without Sam Steele and Jesse Puljujarvi, but they're big boosts for the Tornadoes, and they have potential to be long-term Tornadoes and impact players for that franchise going forward.
And Red Army wasn't done there.
Red Army's been clearing cap space, clearing bodies, and they went on to, we had teased in a prior episode of UFHL Now that Igor Shesterkin would be coming up for the Red Army. That he did finally, Luc Grenier made room for Igor Shesterkin by packaging Brendan Lemieux and Brian Elliott off for futures again there, and then also got a second-round pick for Joel Armia and placed Oscar Sundqvist on the LTIR because St. Louis Blues did that this week. So all of a sudden, Red Army sitting with $6.4 million in cap space ahead of the deadline. And Luc Grenier has kind of been on and off the trade board saying, hey, I'm no longer looking for any trades, but I can guarantee you that the Red Army's always open for business, and they're still working the phone lines trying to get one more big fish to try and secure first place. And you look at the amount of players that Red Army parted with there, that's 6 players between Puljujarvi and Steele, and then you get Brendan Lemieux and Brian Elliott, Joel Armia, and Oscar Sundqvist on the LTIR. That it looks like, what's he doing? He's decimating his roster. But then you look at the 6 players he's calling up from the protected list. He's got Igor Shesterkin, Kirby Dach, Alexis Lafreniere, Tim Stützle, Trevor Zegras, and Jamie Drysdale. I mean, that's an embarrassment of riches that he was hoarding on the protected list and kind of cycling in and out. But those guys are now going to be regulars in the lineup for Red Army going forward down the stretch run. They all have roster spots now locked in. So as long as those young guys keep producing and match the guys that are no longer there, I think Red Army remains the team to beat, as we've been saying on UFHL Now.
Luc Grenier, who I like to call George Steinbrenner, he's starting to remind me a little bit of a romantic comedy, like a rom-com, because, the lead character, he loves her not. This is my flower. Luc Grenier's trading today. He's not trading today. He's trading today. He's not trading today. So I love it. I love the personality. He comes on there and he wants to make a bunch of deal, and then the next day he's not trading, and then he comes back. So it's like a rom-com to me. I absolutely love it. And the personalities in this league are great. So it's absolutely beautiful. And he's not alone. There are teams that are trying to catch Luc Grenier. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think Red Army's going to be caught. But there's definitely a cool kind of race going on in the top 3.
There's an arms race, and certainly, like I said, I think Red Army is going to be tough to catch, but that second place is going to be a slugfest down the stretch between the Titans and the Ice Vikings, and the Ice Vikings have made one of their moves. They were willing to spend to try and secure second place by bringing in Ryan Strome. Kasperi Kapanen had been hurt and sidelined, so they traded an injured Kasperi Kapanen as well as Anthony Angelo in exchange for Ryan Strome, Dustin Wolf, who's a top goaltending prospect in the Western Hockey League, and $225 US. So they're willing to spend to try and overtake the Titans for second place, and now they've reunited Ryan Strome with Mika Zibanejad on the Ice Vikings. So if only the Rangers can play the Flyers a few more times this season, I think the Ice Vikings have a chance of catching the Titans. But I took a look at that because everybody always says with cash considerations and trades, well, why would you throw in money there when Kapanen and Strome are essentially close to equal for next season and stuff? But you look at the potential winnings, and as of this recording, second place would pay $3,252 or 10.75%, and third place would pay $2,465 or 8.15%. So the difference is $787 as of today, minus $225. you'd come away with a $562 profit on the $225 you spent if Ryan Strome is enough of a boost to overtake the Titans for second place. So I think they're thinking, let's throw in a bit of cash in this trade and hope that it brings back, an extra $500 by overtaking the Titans. But I think you're right. I think the Titans are also utilizing the trade board. I think they're not content with where they're at, and they don't feel comfortable in second place, and they'd love to give Red Army a scare down the stretch here. They're only under 100 points behind. It's not a runaway by any means. A couple good nights, and it's neck and neck again. So I think the Titans, looking at guys like Jordan Eberle, Oscar Lindblom, Andre Burakovsky, and then some guys that aren't having as good of years, guys like Andreas Janssen and Ivan Barbashev, and even a young guy like Travis Dermott and Philip Myers on the back end. And Travis Dermott's another one of those guys, Dean. He went on the trade bait board. He's had a quiet year, and he bags a goal, and he gets an assist the next night. And that trade bait board, if your name ends up there, you seem to pick up the pace. But I think Titans are trying to tweak that lineup a little bit as well for some win now upgrades, both the Titans and the Ice Vikings, because I don't think the Outlaws have had some really good nights lately in fourth place, but I don't think they're going to be able to catch third place just based on the gap there. So I really think it's a slugfest between the Titans and the Ice Vikings for second place, and yet they're still both trying to catch Red Army, or at least make Luc Grenier sweat down the stretch. So I expect all three of those top three teams to potentially make some additions between now and Monday's deadline.
I'm not sure anything makes Steinbrenner sweat, but we'll see what happens on there. And hey, the Brutes, they got some podcast karma, right? They showed up on the podcast, then they get a little bit of a bump, and maybe we should be calling it trade bait karma, trade board karma, because anybody that seems to go on there seems to get a little bit of that bump. So that's great news. We showed the top 10 earlier, no changes. The first time that's happened since we've been keeping track, but there was a big trade between a couple of top 10 teams.
There was. The Grizzlies and Outlaws hooked up for a nice blockbuster since the last show over the past week. Kyle Palmieri, who obviously is on the move in the NHL from the Devils to the Islanders. He's also on the move in the UFHL, going from the Outlaws to the Grizzlies, along with a real quality, potential number one defenseman down the road, and Philip Hronek of Detroit. Are going to the Grizzlies along with a second round pick in exchange for Teuvo Teravainen, who's been sidelined with a concussion and has a nice contract, nice cap hit going forward, has that chemistry with obviously Sebastian Aho on Carolina's top line when he's healthy, but he's been sidelined, and the Grizzlies have been slipping a little bit in the standings. They're in 9th place and 10th starting to sneak up and 8th starting to pull away. So I think the Grizzlies really wanted to establish some healthy and active players down the stretch. I know they also acquired Brian Dumoulin and shipped out Jake Gardner as well as Mattis Kivlenieks in that trade. So I think they want guys that are playing, guys that are active and healthy. So by adding guys like Kyle Palmieri, Philip Hronek, and Brian Dumoulin, I think the Grizzlies are trying to take that step forward. And I think the Outlaws, again, they're pretty comfortable in 4th place. I doubt they think they can catch 3rd. The Royals are within striking distance from 5th place to catch them for 4th, but they're comfortable in that 4-5 range, and I think they're looking a little bit more to the future with, especially with Teuvo Teravainen.
Oh, man, this is going to be a wild deadline for sure. And there's a lot of other teams, Larry, that have players that are eligible or on the block, rather, and available for trade. So kind of why don't you run through some of the teams and some of the names that have some specific guys out there for maybe some of the other GMs to take a look at?
I think the Generals, again, Curtis Johnson was on the podcast last week, and we talked a lot about Patrick Laine and his well-documented struggles in Columbus, but now Patrick Laine's name is on the trade bait board, and the Generals actually put their big 3 out there and said, Patrick Laine, Tyler Seguin, Vladimir Tarasenko, let's hear some offers, looking for hockey deals, looking for maybe some help. They have Thomas Chabot on the back end, maybe another stud defenseman or just a swap of another big name forward. So the Generals are open for business. We've talked a lot about defensemen already, but the Blizzard have some blue liners. They 1 down, 3 to go possibly. They have Noah Hannafin, Hampus Lindholm, and Brandon Carlo. They already moved out Alex Goligoski. So I think the Blizzard could potentially be moving some more defenders out as well. And And then you look down, up and down the list in the NHL as well. And, Alex Goligoski's moved there. David Savard was a guy who was on the trade bait board in the UFHL, but he's actually been claimed off waivers just today. So he won't be moving. But certainly there's a lot of names around the UFHL that are in play, and some big names like a guy like Patrik Laine. And I know it would take an offer that would have to knock their socks off to move Patrik Laine. And Curtis Johnson said as much in the podcast. He's no rookie to fantasy hockey. He knows the value of Patrik Laine long-term in a dynasty league, but the right offer could land you Patrik Laine ahead of Monday's deadline.
That's so interesting. And something that, we're really looking forward to down the road is the Legends League. And a guy who I think would make a pretty good legend in Ryan Getzlaf was involved in something.
Yeah, potential legend trade it is kind of, we haven't seen a lot of them. I mean, obviously guys like Ovechkin and Crosby, those owners really know the value of those players going into the Legends League, or potential value, perceived value. So they're not on the block. Even a guy like Joe Thornton, right? The Royals wouldn't trade him because they know he's going to be worth a lot. But Ryan Getzlaf's not quite at that same level, but he'd probably be a tier 1 legend. And he was traded by Dynasty in exchange for Marcus Johansson and Alex Goligoski from the Blizzard. So interesting trade there. Ryan Getzlaf was sort of the biggest name on Dynasty's roster and sort of the franchise player. And Ryan Getzlaf currently has a $8.25 million cap hit, but it's the final year of his contract. And if he's staying in Anaheim with, guys like Zegras and Drysdale and some of these young guys that are going to need new contracts in the years to come, I think Ryan Getzlaf's made enough money in his career. I don't know if he'll go down to the Joe Thornton, Jason Spezza, $1 million kind of deals, but I think he'll settle in around that $4 or $5 million if he signs an extension there, or even as a UFA somewhere else. So I think interesting trade for Dynasty to sort of part ways with their face of the franchise, but a nice pickup for Blizzard on that side. And Dynasty gets a little deeper again, which, Xavier's managed to do a patchwork job on that roster to really rebuild it and keep them in the middle of the pack and competitive. So a nice trade for both teams, but Ryan Getzlaf on the move in the UFHL.
And a guy who might get traded in the NHL and the UFHL is Mike Hoffman, who it sounds like the Royals are really motivated to trade this guy.
They are shopping him hard, and I know they've hit up Red Army trying to sell Mike Hoffman there, saying this is the stretch run ringer you need. And like I said, I think Red Army created cap space for the youth movement to get those young guys in the lineup, but also to have the room to bring in a ringer. And I don't know if Mike Hoffman's the right target there for Red Army, but it's certainly a lot of franchises are going to be interested in Mike Hoffman if the St. Louis Blues move him. And you look at the NHL, Dean, teams that need a top 6 winger right now, Boston, Colorado, Florida, who Mike Hoffman came from Florida, had a lot of success in Florida. They moved out Brett Connolly to free up some cap space, as well as some other cap-related moves. So I think a return to Florida for Mike Hoffman could be in the cards, as well as Boston, Colorado, and potentially even Toronto. I know they're looking for a winger. If Nylander gets healthy or comes back, Nylander, Tavares, they need another winger there, potentially upgrade on Alex Galchenyuk. So I think Mike Hoffman will be a hot commodity in the NHL, and certainly Red Army's the Royals are busy shopping him hard to Red Army and others within the UFHL.
All right, how about a trade that almost happened but didn't? What was the story there?
Yeah, so with the process of submitting a trade and needing the other franchise to confirm the trade, occasionally a trade gets submitted and there's a miscommunication or whatever, and the trade falls through. And we had one of those this week, actually, involving the Royals and Kamikaze. The potential trade was going to send Matthew Olivier, who's been a feisty guy for Kamikaze. And, we joke that Kamikaze sort of got all the goons now because they acquired Brendan Lemieux from Red Army as well. So last week you showed the PIMS leaders. Now Kamikaze has 4 of the 5 on that list. And Matthew Olivier was a young guy that not a lot of people know, but he was on that list, and he hits the PIMS category hard for the UFHL. So he was actually going to head to the Royals for a 2023 first-round pick, and the Royals were going to purchase Tyler Wall, a Rangers goaltending prospect from Easton Scouting, as part of that deal as well. But the deal fell through, and that 2023 first-round pick from the Royals actually ended up being moved for a couple of young defensemen in Jeremy Lozon and Connor Clifton from the North Stars. So that trade fell through and is no longer on the table. But it is interesting how not every trade gets done. And even when they get to the commissioner level, sometimes they still fall through.
Oh, that's so funny. Kamikaze, they're basically the Broad Street Bullies of the UFHL, right? Like they're the Charlestown Chiefs. Next thing you know, they're going to be bringing in three brothers with glasses to intimidate everybody. But I love it. I absolutely love it. All right, I love the insider advice that you have as well. What are you going with this week?
So this week, just because the trade deadline's on Monday, obviously you want to be. We talked about it in last week's episode to be potentially identifying targets with your trades that are players that are going to be going into the NHL playoffs. And then this week's advice is, as soon as that trade deadline's over, start planning for the playoff draft and really realize which teams aren't going to make the UFHL playoffs, and start looking at those rosters and building your playoff draft player pool, your list of targets, where you might be picking based on the order. For a lot of the franchises, GMs, and owners that weren't part of the playoffs last August through October, this is a whole new experience. So get familiar with the playoff format, the way the draft works, and all that. And obviously, the first place team picks first in every round. So if Red Army hangs on to first, they'll have the first overall pick in the playoffs and throughout every round. And the reason that is so that the favorites from the regular season remain the favorites going into the playoffs on paper, essentially. Because they've earned that right. And obviously they're going to lose players that miss the NHL playoffs from their roster. So they got to replace. The idea of the playoff draft is to replace those empty spots of players that missed the NHL playoffs that you had on your fantasy franchise. And you're drafting players from the non-UFHL playoff franchises, the UFHL franchises that missed the playoffs. You're drafting those players off their rosters who made it to the NHL playoffs. So it's a lease system, but certainly the big advice after the trade deadline is shift into playoff mode and really start identifying targets, because I think, Dean, it's going to be a crazy tight turnaround. I've actually heard rumors that the NHL playoffs could start before the NHL regular season ends, which would be absolutely chaotic for fantasy and potentially a big issue. But if not, it sounds like at the absolute minimum, there's going to be games going into the evening one night and playoffs will start the next. And if there's playoff implications still, both in the UFHL as well as the NHL on that final day, and then playoffs start the next day, we got to do that playoff draft that night. And so if it's going to be that tight of a turnaround, you have to be preparing down the stretch, and you better take notice of who Duckman's domination has. If Justin Schultz stays with Duckman's, hey, he's on Washington. Washington's going to the playoffs. Get them on your list and just go down the list, work your way from the bottom of the standings up. The teams that are mathematically out of playoffs or aren't going to be able to make the UFHL playoffs after the trade deadline, once their rosters are locked in, start scouting those rosters and really get your own playoff draft list going, because the player pool, like the actual spreadsheet and the draft setup, is probably going to come out an hour before the draft starts. And that's all the prep time you're going to have. So you're on your own for preparing for the playoff draft. And that's my advice this week, is once the rosters are locked in at the trade deadline, get preparing for the playoffs.
Well, and that's also something for teams that are selling players to think about as well, is that if you don't get the right offer and that player has a decent contract for next year, you might be better off keeping them, and hopefully they get leased and picked up for the playoffs. And if they're a good player like Justin Schultz, we'll if we keep Justin Schultz, he's definitely getting drafted in the playoff draft, and that team wins, you can make some money. So a lot of options. Teams aren't just forced to sell guys at the deadline for a low ball offer. They can actually keep them and possibly make some money, or then have them again next year. So lots of things to think about, not just for the teams that are buying as the trade deadline approaches. And then soon after that, we're all going to be meeting as owners, because that's going to be a very important step to take as we table things that we'll be voting on in the offseason, I'd imagine.
Yeah, so I think the playoff draft, the playoff payouts, those sort of things will be revisited a little bit at the mid-season owners meetings, as well as setting the entry fee for next season. And basically just those meetings, no changes really come out of those meetings other than setting the entry fee, but it really paints the lay of the land for what's to come in the next few months leading up to the off season. So, you're going to go through the entry fee. You're going to go through the playoff draft, the expansion draft, first time doing UFHL free agency. How's that going to work? the UFFS scouting committee is going to make a presentation on behalf of the scouts and where they see some potential changes for the entry auction, which will be a big talking point there. And then we talked about last week potentially tokenizing the franchises to and attract shareholders on the platform. So those will be the big talking points. But by and large, there's not a lot of voting or a lot of decisions other than the entry fee at these midseason meetings. It's more so clarifying and answering questions on those upcoming events, so everybody knows how things are going to work between now and July 21st at the expansion draft. And then come August is when the real decisions, the changes for the 21-22 season happen, where owners and franchises will table their proposed changes. That happens at the off-season meetings. All these upcoming events are still technically part of this season, just as they are in the NHL. So this meeting will be basically clarifying what's to come and fielding questions and really painting the picture of how these next few months are going to look for the UFHL moving forward beyond the trade deadline.
All right, man. It's going to be a busy weekend for you, I know, and I look forward to being a part of the UFHL Trade Deadline Show live on Monday night. We're working without a net on Monday, so hopefully we got our P's and Q's ready, and we'll have a fun time wrapping up what will hopefully be a busy weekend in the UFHL leading up to the trade deadline. Larry, thanks as always. Get a little bit of rest today because you're going to be busy this weekend.
Sounds good, Dean. Hoping to have some Duckman's domination trades to process over the coming days, and best of luck to Duckman's in your wheeling and dealing leading up to Monday's deadline.
Thank you very much.
This is UFHL Now with Dean Millard. Get in the game, where you own the game.
All right, now we just have to wait for all those predictions and potential trades to happen. There's certainly going to be a lot of action. As mentioned, the trade deadline, you know this already, or at least you should if you're a GM or an owner, 3 p.m. Eastern on Monday. And then we will have a live wrap-up show. Darren Bates, Larry Fisher. I'll be kind of behind the scenes working on some production, but we'll join the show whenever possible. And we are going to have some very special guests on that program as well. So the time is still being worked out, but it will be Monday evening, live show right here on the Ultimate Fantasy Sports Network. And that means it's time to wrap things up on this edition. Don't forget to be joining in on our Telegram chat on the Pass, Score, Win, Zill contest. Just a beautiful opportunity to, first of all, get yourself used to the wallet and the system that we're going to be using, and a chance to win some free Zill. Who doesn't want that? The new site is almost ready. I think we might have it ready to go sometime on Monday, maybe sooner. I'm not sure, but I'm hearing some really, really good things about that for sure. And of course, if you want to catch other great shows here on the network, we have the UFFS podcast every second Sunday. Fantasy Hockey Time comes out Monday morning. 2 Minute Tuesday with Darren Bates. Tracking the Draft with Craig Button and myself on Wednesday. And UFHL Now comes your way every Friday.
UFHL Now is produced by DM Productions. To get in touch, head to www.podcastalley.ca.